Hey everybody, welcome to Cougars Care. Those of you that are here in person, those of you that are here online, thanks for being here. Hopefully you meant to be at Cougars Care coping with sadness and depression, because that's where you are. If you meant to be somewhere else, I guess I'll see you later. But thanks for being here. I know Friday afternoons are a rough one, so I'm looking forward to spending the next hour and a half with you guys. I'm going to be lecturing a bit here, but I'll try and keep the lecturing to a minimum, and hopefully we can practice some actual skills for coping with sadness and depression here, so that it's not a boring afternoon. Can you get the next slide, right? So basically today we're going to go through three different things. I'm going to talk about sadness trends at APU and at colleges nationwide. Then we're going to dive into what I talked about before, like those coping strategies, things you can actually do for yourself or for your friends if you're going through some kind of sadness. And then number three, talk about where you can go for more support. That's going to be basically an advertisement for the Counseling Center, because I work for the Counseling Center, and so I put advertisements into all of my workshops. Other than that, ground rules. We're not going to be really asking anybody to share anything too personal about themselves today. But in general, let's keep each other's privacy. Let's respect each other here. We're all going to have differences of opinions. That's fine. Feel free to take a break and step away if needed, especially those of you that are in the room here. The bathrooms are just out this door and like 5 steps that way. So that's nice and easy. Also, we're going to be talking about mental health trends and depression and self-harm. And so those things can be triggering sometimes. Just take care of yourselves, step away if you need to. And finally, ask questions anytime. Those of you that are online, our wonderful graduate assistant Ray is manning the Zoom here. So you're actually signed in as Nathaniel Fernandez, so I think. So message Nathaniel Fernandez there in the chat with any questions that you have. Those of you that are in here, you can raise your hands and just call out, honestly. We're not a huge group. So happy to answer any questions as long as we are going. There should be some handouts coming around. Those of you that are in person here, those of you that are online, as we go through, we'll file transfer you in the Zoom chat all the handouts that you're going to need. But yeah, so let's get started with me stopping talking for a second. I'd love for all of you to turn to the people around you, maybe in groups of like 3 or 4. And let's just start off with a discussion. Those of you that maybe have been around APU for a while, those of you that are maybe new to APU, how have you seen sadness or depression talked about on campus? How do people talk about it? How do people deal with it? Do they talk about it at all, kind of thing? And Ray's going to put those of you online into some breakout groups for just a minute. So go ahead and talk amongst yourself. We'll do 2 or 3 minutes on this, and then we'll kind of come back and discuss together as a group. Go ahead. All right, thank you, everybody. Hopefully we had some good, productive discussion. We'll come back together, and I'd love to hear from you a little bit. So those of you that are on Zoom, please put some comments in the chat here. Those of you that are in here, I'm just going to like call on people or whatever. But what you guys talk about? How is sadness? How is depression dealt with or talked about at APU? How have you guys seen it? So that's really cool to hear. But yeah, it's a lot about, oh, I don't know what to do with that, but here, let me direct you to resources. So that's a good thing, you know, definitely, but also like it can be difficult to talk about, just like you said too. What about other thoughts? Yeah. That's awesome. I assume we have a lot of psychology majors in here, probably. It's good to hear that's happening in the department. Probably that varies department to department too, probably, right? So some know a lot about the Counseling Center, all about it. Some might know less. We don't maybe have done a worse job advertising or whatever kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, great. Any responses on the Zoom?
Somebody said a couple of teachers have given resources fairly often at the end of class, acknowledging the people and places to go.
Awesome. So what I'm hearing kind of generally from everybody is like, okay, we're growing an awareness of this stuff. We're growing an awareness of sadness, depression, anxiety, what these things are, and the fact that they matter, right? But the primary advice, which is good advice, by the way, is go talk to a counselor about it, right? You know, and cool. I'm a counselor. I'd love to talk to each and every one of you about it if you like, right? You know, but it sounds like there's less discussion maybe about individual skills that you guys can use for yourselves on your day-to-day kind of thing. And so I'm really hopeful that maybe today we can kind of dive into some of those things. some options for you to try or suggest for your friends to try, in addition to being able to go talk to a counselor when you don't have time to do that in the moment, or in between counseling sessions or that kind of thing. So if we could get the next slide, please. One of the things I want to talk about here, and one of the things I'm glad is changing at APU, as we've all been talking about, like people are talking more openly about sadness and depression. That didn't used to always be the case, right? In any school, really. I'm a little bit older than most of you in here, and millennials are pretty bad talking about their feelings. We're better than probably Gen X though, but Gen Z is better than us, and et cetera, right? Like as we seem to progress through time, fortunately, people are talking about sadness, talking about depression more openly, and acknowledging that it's a real thing. But you still see out there, you probably have certain friends or family members or whatever that don't talk about this stuff, where it's a very taboo subject, right? Well, I'll point you back to the Bible. The shortest verse in all of the New Testament, right, is Jesus wept. Well, I guess here we have Jesus began to weep. This is a different translation of it, right? But we know that God can be sad too. So y'all should be able to admit that when you're being sad, and you shouldn't have to feel bad about that, right? And we also know that God is with us in all of our sufferings, in the story of Exodus and the Israelites' flight from Egypt, right? And in so many other stories that we see. And so I want to talk a little bit more about, if you could go to the next slide, what the difference is when we talk about God being with us in our sadness versus God being with us in our depression. Because when we respond to sadness versus when we respond to depression, those can be two different things, right? Those can be, they require a different sort of set of tools to respond to each one, right? And some people don't know the difference between those two words. And really the difference is weird because it's sort of on a spectrum, right? You get sad enough, you might consider that depression. In psychology, we define the difference as basically clinical distress or functional impairment. Those of you that have read a DSM before, don't read a DSM, they're very boring. But that's the language that's in there, right? And the point is that sadness is a normal emotion that brings us down, that weighs heavy on us, but it doesn't necessarily stick with us constantly, or it doesn't necessarily stop us from doing the things that we need to do in our day-to-day, right? So like in this scenario here, Rosalind is dealing with a breakup and is super sad about it, thinks, oh, what am I going to do with my life? I was so invested in this relationship and now it's gone, I'm super sad, right? That's more sadness versus this description of John here, where I'm worried about my friend isn't eating, hasn't picked up her phone, hasn't been to school, hasn't been to class in like a month, right? You see that in one section, one is a natural sadness, but it can lead into these maladaptive depression moments where we're really unable to function at all, right? Give us another couple examples here, right? So if somebody feels really hopeless after failing an exam, right, you might be really sad about that. Versus if somebody feels entirely useless, hopeless, and feels like they shouldn't exist and that there's no purpose to their being, right? That's the difference between sadness and depression. You see that it's on this continuum, right? So this is some data from the most recent National College Health Assessment Survey of APU students in general. So you see that this is all pre-pandemic, by the way, because they gathered the data usually every like 3 years or whatever, so we haven't had another data gathering round yet. But anyways, 91% of students have felt exhausted at least one point in the last 12 months, right? Overwhelmed, exhausted, very sad, lonely, anxious. And we see that 45% of students have felt depressed at least some point in the last 12 months. And even 13% have considered suicide at least one time in the last 12 months. There was about 40 people signed up for today's workshop, between those of you that are in here in person, those of you that are here online. And so if we do the math on that, that's probably about 4 people that are with us today, right? And so these are soberingly intense numbers, right? This is a very common experience, unfortunately, which means if you're going through this depression, even if you're having suicidal thoughts, you're not alone. But that doesn't mean that it's good to keep you there, right? We need to find ways to help you get out of that space, or even help you deal with the sadness if you're not depressed necessarily, but you're just dealing with that normal day-to-day sadness that we're all feeling. Next slide, please. So I want to do 3 different skills with you today. I'm going to talk about pleasant activities. I'm going to talk about cognitive restructuring. I'm going to talk about mindfulness exercises, because everybody deals with their sadness. Everybody deals with their depression in a different way, right? You could think about it a little bit like a toolbox, right? There used to be that old adage, like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? Maybe only I know this old adage. Maybe I'm just showing how old I am right here. A couple of you have heard of this before. Okay, thank you. I'm not totally alone. And so basically, I want to equip you with multiple tools today, because some of those are going to work for you if your depression is more like a nail, or if your depression is more like a Phillips head screw, or whatever it is. My metaphor is getting very stretched here, right? But each of these different tools, I hope, will be useful for you or for your friends or your loved ones in different ways. And so that's why I want to try and offer a variety of tools for you. So as I said, we'll do behavioral activation, rational challenging, and mindful breathing. All right, bring me on to the first skill. So the first skill I'm going to talk about is behavioral activation. So this comes out of this school of thought called behaviorism. Any of you that have taken Psych 101 before, you probably had to learn about like Pavlov and the dog salivating with a bell or whatever. And that was probably on the quiz, and it was really annoying to try to remember exactly how it went. Well, this isn't a quiz, but that idea is behaviorism, right? The idea of behaviorism is that certain things happen in our environment, and if they're good things, that causes us to increase a certain behavior. If they're bad things, that causes us to decrease a certain behavior, right? And so from this perspective, if you think about it this way, somebody becomes depressed when the usual things in their life that make them happy get reduced or shaken up in some way, right? And then that causes them to be less happy. And because they're less happy, they stop doing the things that could make them more happy, and that becomes less and less happy, and it becomes like a snowball type effect, right? So for instance, if you come to APU for the first time, maybe some of you are transfer students, maybe some of you are first-time freshmen, right? If you moved away from home to come here, you're not around the family and friends and the places and things that used to give you comfort, safety, happiness, right? And all of a sudden you're thrust into this new environment, and you have the tendency to get depressed because you don't have those things still reinforcing you. Same thing, maybe you're overloaded in classes. Some of you are taking way too many units. God bless you. I used to take like as few units as I possibly could. I still got my PhD, by the way. So like, y'all calm down on the unit overloads. But anyways, if you're taking lots of those units and all of a sudden all you can do is study and work, and because that's all you have time to do, that cuts out all those other things that you're doing in life to make yourself happy, and you can start to feel more and more sad and more depressed. Same thing maybe with grief. Grief is that way. If we think about the passing of a loved one, as we don't get to talk to them anymore, we don't get to have those interactions with them that we used to like to have, and that leads to depression, right? And so the way that we get out of depression in a behavioral sense is just to, I don't know, do fun stuff, which is a very simplistic way of looking at this for sure, but it actually can be amazingly effective. Do you have another slide on this? I think I do. Yes, so we call it behavioral activation because psychologists always have to have a good word for everything, but it just means do fun stuff. And sometimes it's like very tiny stuff, right? Sometimes you're so depressed you haven't gotten out of bed in like 3 weeks or whatever, and like taking a shower is like a big deal. And even just when you manage to get up out of bed, take a shower, make your bed, it could be a huge step in like countering the sadness, countering the depression, right? Other times, maybe it's just a little bit of sadness, and you need to go out with your friends and go to dinner or go watch a movie or whatever it is that you need to do, right, to make yourself back being happy. And when we do this kind of behavioral activation, it's really important to have like a mix of ideas, right? Some things that are like physically active, like going out for a run or whatever, or something that's more calm, something just staying in, watching your favorite movie or something like that. Stuff that's social, hanging out with friends, or stuff that you can do alone, right? Because your friends aren't always available, or you're not always able to go hit the gym, depending on the hours or whatever, right? So a bunch of different types of activities is the best way to come up with a good behavioral activation plan. So that's one side of it. That's if we look at things from a behaviorist point of view. Next slide, please. If we look at things from a cognitive point of view, so cognitive behavioral therapy, which you may or may not have heard of. Again, sorry for all these terms. Don't remember the terms, just remember the skills that I'm trying to teach you. Cognitive behavioral therapy is another school of thought. It builds on top of this whole Pavlovian, Skinnerian behaviorism stuff. But we want to actually think about how we think, right? It's not all about just what happens to us, what reinforcers are in our environment, but it matters what we think about those reinforcers, how we interact with our world, right? Bless you. So basically, if after a bad breakup, somebody's like, whatever, I didn't need him or her anyways, like, I'm gonna keep it moving kind of thing, then great. They're probably not gonna be too sad. They're not gonna be too depressed. Everybody's gonna be a little sad, right? But they're gonna not be too prone to sadness or depression versus somebody that thinks about it like, oh, you know, that was my person. There's no other fish in the sea. The sea is entirely devoid of fish, right? That person is going to be a lot more sad, a lot more prone to depression, right? Same thing, maybe in class, you're having struggles, you fail one assignment, right? And maybe it's like a big assignment or it's in this class that's been anxious, provoking for you. And say, oh my gosh, I failed this class. I'm useless. I'm hopeless. There's no way I'm going to pass any of these classes. I'm going to end up failing out of school immediately. And, you know, my whole life will be ruined, right? That person is going to be much more prone to depression than a person who says, okay, I failed this course. That's bad. I might even fail out of college, but I can come up with some way to kind of deal with it, some way to combat it, right? Or even like guilt and shame can fall into this. If somebody makes a mistake, you say, hey, like, that was wrong with me. I messed up. I got to do better next time versus somebody saying, hey, that was wrong of me. I'm a terrible person. How could I possibly do that? I deserve to be punished. I deserve no happiness for the rest of my life, kind of thing, right? So you see, everything is about that interplay of your actual thoughts versus the situation. So it's in cognitive behavioral therapy, we don't want to think negative thoughts like that. But it's very critical when I say we don't want to think negative thoughts, that I don't want you to think positive thoughts either, right? Because if you just like, I'm not up here trying to preach to you optimism right now. Like optimism is good sometimes, but like you all met the person with like way too much misplaced confidence, right? And like that person could end up being depressed too by the time they figure out all that confidence is just a bunch of hot air and their whole system falls apart, right? And so I'm not talking to you when I'm talking about cognitive therapy about being optimistic instead of pessimistic. I want you to be realistic when we talk about this, right? So like I said, if you fail a test, don't say, that's fine, I'm still gonna get an A in this class. No, you're not. But don't say, oh, my life is ruined forever. No, it's not, right? Uh-oh, this is bad. I need to get this together. I might fail this class, or, you know, I might have some significant negative consequences, but the world hasn't ended, right? That is a rational, realistic, logical way of assessing what's going on, right? Next slide, please. So how do we deal with that, though? That's what the second handout that I'm giving you today, the one with the cute little pictures on it is. How we deal with that is we identify when we're thinking in a way that's not useful or helpful, and we try and stop doing that, right? These are uncommon thinking styles that are all these pictures on this one. For instance, you might be the kind of person that disqualifies the positive, right? So all the negative stuff in your life you focus on, but all the positive stuff you throw in the trash, right? Or you might be the kind of person that engages in a lot of emotional reasoning, right? Because I feel bad, everything must be bad, right? Or maybe you're the kind of person that focuses on should or must statements all the time. I should be doing better than this. I shouldn't be doing that. I should be a better brother, sister, cousin, whatever, friend, partner, right? Albert Ellis is a famous cognitive therapist, and he used to make a joke about shoulding all over yourself, right? A lot of people have too much expectations. That's what passes for a joke in psychology, okay? Psychology doesn't have good jokes. So don't should on yourself. So we want to identify which of these styles that we're most prone to. I feel like for me, all or nothing thinking is like a big one that I struggle with a lot. And I know that I struggle with that, right? And so when I'm really feeling some way, I have to ask myself, am I thinking rationally or am I all or nothingness? Nothing being, am I doing all or nothing thinking now? And so if you're having trouble, you can flip to the back of that sheet. There's a whole bunch of challenging questions for you. What are some other ways I could look at this situation? Am I looking at the whole picture of the situation? Can I really predict the future? Am I exaggerating how bad the results might be, or is there some other realistic way to engage in this kind of thing, right? And so that's the basis of rational challenging, and that's a skill that is incredibly important coming from that CBT framework to challenge our depression, right? Next slide, if you could. So I've taught you 2 skills right now. I want us to get into groups again. So Ray will build some groups online for those of you that are in the Zoom. Once you get into your groups, you can unmute yourselves and turn your cameras on or whatever. Those of you that are in here, you can't mute yourselves, and my eyes are already on, so sorry. We'll get into groups of 3 or 4, who's ever all around you here, and we're going to respond to these prompts I've got up on the screen here. So I want us to talk about behavioral activation first. I have a whole list of pleasurable activities here for you. Some of these are like weird and outdated, but like others are sort of normal. And plus, these aren't an exhaustive list, of course. So you're going to get into a group and share with each other what makes you happy. What do you do when you're feeling sad to feel better? And that way, when you share with each other, you can give each other ideas. You can also commit to doing those kinds of things more. Let me finish the instructions, please. Thank you. And then second, we're going to talk about the cognitive restructuring stuff. So that second handout I gave you. Everybody's going to try and pick out which of these unhelpful thinking styles are common to them and share with each other. I bet you'll find a lot of overlap between all of you in here. And then look at these questions on the back and see which ones might be most useful to you. And that's what we'll be doing, okay? We'll share those 3 things with each other. Sound good? Everybody feel good on the instructions? All right, groups of 3 to 4, ready, go. All right, thank you, everybody. We'll come back together as a group. Hopefully, we got some good stuff discussed here. We'll process through a little bit. I'd love to hear a little bit more from you. So again, those of you on Zoom, please put stuff in the chat. Those of you in here can just shout out. But who had some good answers for the behavioral activation one? What do people like to do when they're feeling down? What is something that picks you up that you're willing to share with the group? Yeah. Writing can be great, whether you're journaling about something that you're going through, or even just like creative writing or something like that for fun. I never found like academic writing fun, but maybe some of you do. So like, I mean, if you do, more power to you, you know. But all kinds of writing, yeah, that's a great one. Others. Yeah, instruments, music, creativity of many forms is oftentimes a huge one that people like to do. But I like what you mentioned there too, in terms of that's called behavioral scheduling, right? You know, okay, you're going through a really bad week, or you know next week is going to be really bad because you've got lots of personal stressors or lots of academic things or work that you're going to be working too many shifts or whatever. Do something that weekend, schedule it in advance so that you can look at it in your calendar and look forward to it. I love it. Anything on the Zoom?
2 people. One person said having a support system where you can lean on loved ones, and another person said getting more into film stuff like photography and practicing playing and making music.
I love it. So that music has come up twice for sure. I wish I was good at music. Like maybe I would be better in life, but I'm bad at music. But I love that there was a mention of social stuff there as well. Like I think that's something that we should definitely keep in mind here. A lot of these activities that we can do by ourselves, but a lot of these activities that we can do in groups as well, because sometimes you need to be away from people because people are too much. So sometimes you're way too alone and you need to find a space with people, right? So having a good balance of that is great. And I like the whole photography idea as well, because again, there's some more creativity there. So love it. So moving on to the next question here. I already told you guys I'm terrible with the all or nothing thinking, right? What of these unhelpful thinking styles did you guys notice in your group? Were there any shared by people? What were common ones? Yeah. Getting stuck on that should, must, rumination, like I must do better, I gotta do better, I need to, exactly, right? I'm right there with you a lot of times too. A lot of other people, I see a couple smiles, more should than must around the room. Yeah. What other ones? What other ones? Yeah. Jumping to conclusions is a great one too, right? Because we don't even need to have all the facts before we can start feeling bad about something. Yeah, exactly. And our brains are wired to do that, right? Because we need to be able to predict things sometimes, and that can be useful to us and helpful to us when we don't have all the information. But sometimes our brains run away from us, especially when we're feeling sad, we're feeling depressed, and we start jumping to wrong conclusions, right? So yeah, perfect one. Any more? A couple others. What were common ones that y'all have found? Yeah. Dude, the mental filter is rough, right? Because a lot of the times when we scan our world, we're just scanning for threats, right? Because you need to react more quickly to a threat than to like something that makes you happy, right? You know, because a threat is threatening, right? But if we get stuck in that mode, just like you're saying, you know, then all we're doing is looking at the negatives. All we're doing is looking at the threats. And what used to be a good, helpful thing is definitely making us depressed because we never look at the positives, right? I'm totally right there with you. Anything from the Zoom folks?
Someone said
Assuming, right? You know what they say about assumptions. I can't finish that joke. This is a AP lecture. So yeah, hopefully we see that there's a lot of these that are common amongst all of us here, right? And I hope that whenever you're in trouble, you can ask yourself some of these questions on the back here, or even if you don't use some of these questions in particular, that you can find some way to challenge those thoughts that you're commonly jumping to, right? Use some evidence gathering. Okay, let's move on to that third skill. So I've told you about, these are actually in chronological order in the way they were invented. So behaviorism kind of came first, cognitive, the revolution came next, and then mindfulness. Those of you maybe have heard of mindfulness before, especially if you've taken some yoga classes or done some meditation apps or whatever, right? This is one of the newer approaches to therapy and to depression management that's actually been catching on quite a bit, right? And so mindfulness practices are based a lot in ancient meditative practices throughout the world. And the thought process is, with behaviorism, we're trying to control our environment, right? We're trying to control what pleasant activities we do and avoid unpleasant activities, and that'll solve our depression. Or with cognitive therapy, we're trying to control what we think, right? If we could just control it and think in a rational way, we'll be good to go. And sometimes these are very effective, right? But sometimes we struggle to control our behavior. Sometimes we struggle to control what we're thinking, right? And so a mindfulness perspective actually is interesting because it takes a little bit of a different approach to managing our depression. Like I said, we want lots of tools in our toolbox, right? When we talk about mindfulness, the problem with whatever is making us depressed, with whatever is making us sad, is not that we're sad or depressed, right? It's that we get stuck in that space, right? Something distressing happens to us. We have these emotions. They're normal emotions. It's normal for us to feel not well. But then we get stuck on it because all we could do is keep thinking about it. We perseverate on it, is the term. Or we start engaging in blaming or judgment, right? I'm blaming myself. I should have done better. I shouldn't have done this or that. Or, you know, maybe even blame the situation, right? This is such a terrible thing, and I can't believe my job is so terrible. My boss is the worst and constantly screwing me up, or my professor's so unfair, whatever, right? If we get stuck in this perseverative, always thinking about what's making us depressed, if we get stuck in this blaming ourselves or others for why we're depressed, we just end up lengthening that cycle, right? So instead of being sad or depressed for a limited amount of time in response to our surroundings, instead we've stretched it out by getting stuck on only thinking about that, right? And so from a mindfulness perspective, if you can go to the next slide. From a mindfulness perspective, it's not about changing our depressogenic thoughts or changing our behaviors, but it's about letting ourselves feel what we're feeling, stay focused on the present moment, don't judge the experience and just let our experience be what it is, and then let it go, kind of thing, right? Which could be a challenging mode for us to get into. And to get into that, there's a lot of times we practice lots of different meditative practices. right? So I'm actually going to take us through one here rather than splitting us up into groups. I'm going to do a guided meditation for us. So you have the script that I'm going to use, but if you'd like, just find a comfortable spot in your chair, wherever you're at. You can feel free to close your eyes. If you're comfortable, you can feel free to just like, I don't know, pick a spot on the ground to stare at or look at your shoes or whatnot, however feels good to you. We're going to start this exercise as a way of relaxing. And this exercise is known as a Kyrie, right? This is actually an ancient Christian tradition. If you've never heard the term Kyrie eleison before, it means Lord, have mercy, right? And so those of you that are Christian in the audience, you want to reflect on these words, great. Those of you that aren't Christian in the audience, that's fine too. You know, we can reflect on any number of sacred words. So you may focus on, you know, peace or calm or health or whatever words or whatever meanings that are useful and functional to you, right? So we're going to start by closing our eyes. We're going to bring our attention to your breath as we take a big breath in and out. Big breath in and out. We're going to add in whatever sacred word you choose to reflect on. We're going to, for those of us that are using the Lord have mercy, we're going to take a deep breath in and think, Lord, and breathe out, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Imagine yourself breathing in God and breathing out his mercy. As we continue together, Lord, have mercy. You're going to find your mind wandering away. You're going to feel yourself distracted. That's okay. Just try and bring yourself back to the rhythm of the breath. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. 3 more as we get ready for the ending of this exercise. Lord, have mercy. 1. Lord, have mercy. 2. And finally, Lord, have mercy. 3. When you're ready, go ahead, open your eyes, come back together as a group. Those of you that have fallen asleep, that's okay. Just pinch your neighbor a little bit. And hopefully, again, you feel in that exercise that in this moment, there's nothing wrong. There's plenty of things wrong in our lives. There's plenty of things for us to stress about. But right now, you're stuck here listening to me in Cougars Care anyways, right? So there's no need to be focused on anything else. We can take a quiet, still moment to breathe. And that's something that you could do at any time in your life, right? You have these scripts, you can take these scripts away and read them to yourself if you want, but you know, I've never been good at reading mindful meditations to myself. So Google them. I mean, go online, go on YouTube, download Calm or download Headspace. Headspace is actually still free for all LA County residents. So if you type in Headspace LA County, it should be able to come up. So that's actually kind of cool. This is not sponsored. This is not a sponsored Cougars Care. This is not an advertisement for anything. We also have some of these meditations on our Counseling Center website. So if you ever want something like this, you can go on Counseling Center website, student resources, groups and workshops. But yeah, next slide. So hopefully these skills can help you deal with sadness. Can be a first great step for you when you're starting to feel depressed, maybe to bring yourself out of it, right? And not every time that you feel sadness or you feel some depression will you want or need to go talk to a counselor. But sometimes you will, right? You inevitably will. Because unfortunately bad stuff happens to us in our lives. And no matter how good we are at some of these self-care practices that we've been practicing today, eventually you're going to get overwhelmed, right? And so if you ever find yourself, especially if you're thinking about harming yourself or anybody else, but even if you're struggling to take care of yourself, right? Or you're constantly preoccupied with the feelings of sadness or depression that are flooding you, or if you're constantly overwhelmed by them, right? Or if you just think talking to a professional could help. When in doubt, come talk to a counselor. All of you that are APU students, this is especially true for you because you have access to 100% free, 100% confidential counseling whenever you'd like it, right? And that's from the University Counseling Center, which is me. I mean, not just me, there's plenty of folks that work in our office, right? But you can give me the next slide. You can come to us at the University Counseling Center. You can always check in with the campus pastor's office. The campus ministry office is available for you for counseling as well. SCRD is great. If you're having academic problems, certainly the Academic Success Center. Can I get the next slide? This is where the University Counseling Center is. Any of you that have been to East Campus before, if you go to Magnolia Court, right next to the health center where you used to have to drop off your COVID test, that's where we're at. We're the next door over. It's called Magnolia Court because there used to be a big magnolia tree here and it died and got chopped down. And so we planted this new smaller tree and it died and it got chopped down. And so then those bushes are still there though. So if you come visit us today, you will still see the impenetrable, unkillable bushes, as well as our door right there on your left. We are open 8:30 to 4:30 weekdays, and you can walk in. We have urgent care walk-ins all the time, as well as scheduled counseling appointments. We're also able to meet people over the phone or over Zoom, for those of you that are commuters, or for those of you that just live at the other end of UV and really don't want to walk all the way to the mods. That's totally fine too. I'll even encourage you, those of you that would like to right now, if you want to get out your phones and take a picture of our information here. That way you have it. You may not need it, but you may need it later, or a friend may need it. Also, it's a good activity to take a picture of this right now, and then you can surreptitiously check your text messages since you haven't been looking at your phones for a minute. So go ahead and take a picture of that. And then, once you have a chance for that, hopefully everybody has. In rare cases, you might find yourself an immediate risk to yourself or others. If somebody has a weapon, if somebody's already ingested something that's harmful to them, please call 911 first, rather than calling a counseling center, but that should be a very rare case. For any other things, go ahead and next slide. You can always call us at the counseling center, and we have a 24/7 hotline. So that number is always available. Whereas most offices close, you can call us anytime, and we always have somebody on urgent care on the phones. So last thing here, we'll get into groups of just 2 or 3. Those of you that are online, you can just think about this yourselves. I'm not going to put us into a breakout room because we're just going to do this for a minute. But I'd love for us to reflect on the following before we leave today. All right, let's go ahead and bring it.